like reset itself. So that's not helpful. Oh, maybe it's going live.
Oh, we're live.
Okay. We did it.
Yay.
It's always a surprise.
No, just as shocking to us as it is to you.
It's like so hard to tell.
We need like a flashing like sign that says hello.
Yeah, on both sides. Okay, well, here we are. So I'm Meredith Hawley. I am a lawyer and power dynamics facilitator and best-selling author. And you are?
I'm Erin Leslie. I am the client success manager at Eris. I work with Meredith and just love to chat about all the things with her. So
yes. So I'm the founder of Eris Conflict Resolution, if you don't know. And that is where we help employees stop sexual harassment without quitting their jobs. And I'm very sick, so I apologize about my voice. But today we've been like putting off this live for so long because Erin was on jury duty. And then I was out of town and got super sick. And so now we're here, even though my voice is gone.
Yeah, you can still hear you. We'll only have a problem if it like goes away entirely.
Yeah. I did this morning, so we'll see. You might have to just take over it and start talking about whatever you want to talk about.
Ad lib, great.
So we always want to get on every week and talk to people about how do you stay in touch with the news, how do you stay informed with current events, and how do you not get so depressed and like have to disconnect just to maintain your health. So we want to talk about current news from a standpoint of feeling empowered and feeling like we can make a difference in the world, not just feeling like there's all these terrible things happening and there's nothing that we can do about it. And so Erin I guess we should start with your experience, which I just think is so fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, what do you want me to share about that?
Yeah.
It was crazy. So I got called for jury duty, and
which is always my dream. And you're like, no, I don't want to do it. I want to do my regular life. I'm always like, please let me be on a jury.
Totally. So that was awesome to start off with. But I have been called before and I just sat there all day and they dismissed me in the evening. And then I deferred a couple of times. And this time I was like, okay, I do not have a good reason to defer. I'm going to go. But I totally planned on like, I packed all my work stuff. I was going to catch up on like all the things. It was going to be my work day. And it was a really interesting experience. I went and I found some people I knew. So that was random and fun. And like, we just hung out, but they called like 350 of us to come down that day. And they only had one trial going on. And they ended up selecting 70 of us to fill this jury. So that already was crazy. And that all happened by like 10:30. So it was pretty quick that I found out that I was going to have to go for questioning and that kind of thing. And that process was so fascinating too. I felt like I had never seen like any of those like inner workings before. It was very interesting.
So you were called for a sex abuse case, children.
Yeah. So right when we got into the jury room, actually, they had us all like seated in a special order. And I wasn't up in the jury box at first, but they told us right off the bat, this is a child sexual abuse case, like, just so you guys know. And like almost immediately they asked if people thought they would have a hard time with that. They didn't phrase it quite like that. They phrased it differently, but almost everybody raised their hand.
Yeah, which is fascinating, right?
Yes. Yeah. So pretty quickly people were like, oh, I don't actually want to do this. And then I was like, there were two people that got dismissed like from the jury box. And then I ended up in there. And this took us all day. Like they went through people like all day long this day. And each side got to dismiss with cause, but they also had like a certain number of just people that they could throw out because they wanted to. Because of bias or whatever, I guess. And they were asking
for any reason.
Yeah, exactly.
Peremptory challenge.
Yeah. So, and they asked all kinds of questions. I mean, I am amazed that they selected me.
It is really interesting, right? But you said that so many people just broke down crying because
Yeah.
of
So
their
all
personal
the questions
experience.
they asked were, they let us know the subject
Mm.
matter. They asked us if, sexual abuse had impacted our lives in any way, shape, or form, whether it be ourselves, family, friend, and ask for kind of details around that. And we do have some history where we've advocated in that regard. And so I shared that. I shared what when you first get up there, they ask you to tell them a little bit about you. I shared, who I am, what I do for a
Right.
job, working with you.
Right. And so obviously we advocate for victims of harassment and assault at work. So you're doing that on the client success side every day and seeing all these stories every day that we see, but then you also have the family friend, like personal experience of doing
Yeah.
advocacy.
Yeah, for sure. So I think like ultimately what it came down
Mhm.
to, the reason I ended up being seated on the jury was because, like you said, there was a lot of people who just couldn't even there were a couple people who were like, they heard the subject matter and like even just the few questions and like could not hold it together, like just broke down like sobbing. And so obviously that can't happen throughout the course
Yeah.
of a trial. So that was the thing. And then like every single other, like we randomly had like 5 CASAs, so like court appointed special advocates for kids.
Mhm.
There were teachers and people who had ties to law enforcement. They kicked all those people off. Like it ended up just being me and like one other gal who had like a personal connection to it that had any kind of realm of experience in that regard. And I think it's ultimately because they just ran out of either challenges or ran out of time, because it was like 5:30 by the time we got dismissed. So
It's so interesting. I mean, I'm sure they would have gone to the next day if they hadn't run out of challenges. But it's interesting because we want to talk about the Harvey Weinstein uh conviction from last week that happened like while you were on this jury. Is so
it
interesting.
was nuts. His conviction,
Mhm.
I think, happened only a couple days, like right as we were wrapping up the trial and going into
Okay.
deliberations, like
Yeah,
his
that's what I was thinking.
judgment came
And
down.
he also, do you remember how many charges he had? I'm forgetting.
I don't remember total. He got charged with 2 ultimately, right?
Yeah, and I think he had 6 charges or 5
Okay.
charges, something like that. And so it's interesting from your perspective of being on a jury. So the defendant in your case had 4 charges
Mhm.
and was convicted of 3. And
Yeah.
then Harvey Weinstein had somewhere between 4 and 6 charges and was convicted of 2.
Mhm.
And I feel like your experience really sort of informed how difficult it is to be on a jury and to have a very strong conviction one way or another about the overall occurrences. And how
Yeah.
do you piece apart one charge versus another charge if overall you think that at
Yeah,
least
it was really fascinating, and you and I talked
Mhm.
about this a little bit, like,
Yeah.
since then, but, uh, it was really interesting because in this case, like, it very much was like, there wasn't a lot of, like, physical evidence, obviously, and so, it very much was like listening to the
Mhm.
kiddo's testimony and listening to his testimony basically and seeing all the different interviews and things that had taken place in the course
Mhm.
of this whole process and like kind of deciding from there. And it was like as far as like the ultimate like decision goes, it was really interesting because like right off the bat there was like a big handful of us that felt strongly that he was guilty. And then there was like a group of folks in the middle that were like, I don't know, I do, but I don't. I'm not sure, like, can't quite figure it out. And then there was like a few people who felt very strongly, not that he was innocent necessarily, but that the state didn't do a good job in
Right.
like presenting their case or like they didn't it wasn't persuasive enough to
To
say that he
convict.
was guilty.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it was like, it was really interesting. And we actually, it was a super like roller coaster ride, because I think initially we thought like, oh, this is going to be like easy, like we're all going to be on the same page. And then when it was clear that we weren't, it was like, uh-oh. And we at first misunderstood like the majority numbers that we needed to have. And so we had kind of come to a place where we, like when we first started deliberations, we had chatted it out and talked about it. And we came to a place where like, we could only get the numbers that we thought we needed to have on one. And so we were like, okay, well, I guess that means like he's not guilty on the rest. And I had such a hard time with that. Like it was so difficult to walk back into the courtroom and feel like, oh my gosh, like this is how it's ending up. But then the judge was like, are these your final numbers? And our spokesperson was like, yeah. And he was like, you guys need to go back and like reread your rules. Sorry, everybody's dismissed again. And then we deliberated for another like day after that, because it was so difficult. There were 12 of us at the end, and we had to have a majority of 10-2. And it was like solidly like 9-3. It ultimately like came down to like one person who was sort of like thought that he was guilty on a couple, but not the other two. And ultimately what that came down to was the ability of the witnesses to testify. And
Of the children to testify.
it blew
Yeah.
my mind. I mean, you and I have talked about this, like how hard it is for people who've experienced trauma to be good at like telling their story, or to be good on the witness stand.
Yeah.
And I saw that play out so incredibly well, like in this experience. But also, these were like little girls, they're like Lorelai's age, they're like 9-ish. And so like the ones, like the gal who is kind of like the either or, she was solid on the girl who did a good job on the witness stand telling her story, like who was a good witness. She was the one that she believed. And the one who really struggled and had a hard time, she was like, absolutely not, like I can't like vote in favor of that one. And then there was another one that she felt like solid about, but like one was like the same person, but there were two different instances, and like she was kind of like split on those as well. So it was just really interesting. Ultimately, like what we ended up doing when we went back to deliberations is we brokered a deal. Like we had to like be like, okay, how are we going to get to majority 10-2
Yeah.
on these? And she felt really strongly about the one that she was not okay voting guilty for. And so then we kind of just talked it through and said, all right, well, those of us who, like would really like to see the guilty charge, like we'll change our vote on that one to give you what you want, if you like can change your vote on the one that you're kind of wishy-washy about. So we ended up with 3 guilty and 1 not, because we had to like come to some sort of like
Agreement.
decision. And if we didn't, like the hard thing is like, had we not been able to like compromise and broker that deal, then like we would have been hung up, because we were never going to get there. And then like they would have had to start the whole process like
It potentially means a new trial. I mean, the interesting thing, that one of the things that you said about somebody's testimony being good versus not good was like, it sounded like and these are children, it sounded like the jury both criticized them for not being clear and for having too adult language,
Totally.
which is typical of 9-year-olds, right?
Totally.
Like, how do
Yeah.
you know that word? And why are you being confusing? But
Totally.
like,
Yeah, it was very difficult and perplexing for me to kind of watch that all play out, because I mean, for me, kind of just in my gut, like as soon as they were talking, and like seeing their forensic interviews when they hadn't like had any experience with the court, like they're first off the bat, they're trained to not be leading, they're trained to like get the information in like a safe environment in a way that is not like trying to put like words into their mouth or thoughts into their head. And so like between those interviews, the guy I thought did such a good job. The guy from Kids First did such a good job with those. But then also just like watching them on the stand, for me, I like solidly knew, like I believe them, like they're telling the truth. And also, like I think the thing that was hard is like the defendant is like super like charismatic and like kind of like, a talker, and like he doesn't seem like a bad dude. And so like there was a lot of times where I kind of said, like, listen, just because this guy doesn't seem like a bad guy doesn't mean he made a bad decision or like did bad things, because like it's never the like monster guy that you think, like as the person who's going to do this. And like it was really interesting because the hang up with some of the people was around the girls and the way they told the story. Like they all had sort of similar stories because they had a common like perpetrator,
Yeah.
yeah. So that made sense to me. But then also, like the reason this got flagged for them is they had like a safe touch class in school, so they were using words like appropriate and like inappropriate and like different things that I'm sure they picked up like that day in that class, but people were like, why do they know these words, and then like yeah, like it was further complicated because they're sisters, like they were triplets. And so people were freaking out about that of like, well, did they talk about it? Did they make this up? Because all their stories are like kind of similar, but then they're like a little bit different. And so like there was just a lot that like went into
And it's
it.
interesting because you talked about one person went into which I think this is very common. One person, you were even pointing this out, you don't leave your life experience at the door when you become a juror. And so one person, it sounded like on the jury, had this preconceived idea that kids make up stories like this, and that kind of
Totally.
influenced her
There was
belief about
There was
credibility.
actually a couple people, yeah, there was actually a couple people who were like, "Oh, well, kids, like, they make up stuff all the time." And, I think the state, like, did a good job because she said initially in her opening remarks, there's a difference between being like, "I didn't take that cookie," and,
Yeah,
like, "This person, like, touched my vagina." Like, those are pretty
yeah.
drastically different things. And like that was a big issue too, because like they had the interviews where they shared their story, on the witness stand, but they also had a grand jury situation. And this is the first time that they were like in front of adults,
Mhm.
like in a courtroom setting, like people they didn't know. Like it had been long enough where they realized like the ramifications of their actions, because you hear them in like one of the interviews, they said, I didn't know, like basically one of the girls told her teacher, who obviously is a mandatory reporter, and that kind of kicked things off. But she was like, I didn't know she was going to tell anyone. And so for me, like that's pretty clearly like they didn't fully understand like how this was going to play out. And probably by the time they got to grand jury, they had sort of seen like, oh, this is what that like.
Which is actually pretty scary, I think, for kids. And I think that, like, we have clients who later have assault experiences or harassment experiences, and who have had childhood experiences like this. Like, we've had clients come through, and it can be really hard for them to decide to come forward in the future when they know that there's the potential ramification like this. And when you're a kid, it seems like it goes really fast, right? It seems like you say something and then everything sort of cascades. And so I've even had adults come forward who have had this childhood experience, and they've been like, why are things happening so slow? Why aren't things going faster? Because it seemed like when they were a kid
It
that
went quick.
everything went so quickly and so out
Yeah.
of control.
Yeah, yeah. And so part of the problem is most of them sort of changed their story or recanted when they were at grand jury. And like you and I know that's a thing that happens like just in
Mhm.
general, but like especially with kiddos, I'm sure. And like I'm sorry, but like the initial like thing came out in April. Grand jury was at the end, I think, of October. That's a long time to try and remember the story like exactly,
Mhm.
like, and memories are so like funky anyways with how like people remember
Yeah.
them. I don't know. That's not to say like their story was the same enough for me. And even when they were like, because part of the language was like, I said that? No, I don't think that happened. But then like she would ask them questions of like, where were you when this happened? And they would be like, oh, in my bedroom, you
Yeah.
know? So like it was stuff like that that was like, okay, they're like processing this whole,
Right.
you know,
And child brains are still developing and they're very plastic. And one of the research on PTSD and repressed memories is that for children, actually, their brains are so plastic that they can actually store memories in a separate location and like shield you from the memory itself if it's a trauma memory.
yeah.
It's like a really interesting.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, you alluded to it earlier, but I think it's interesting. They obviously try and choose a jury that's unbiased or is like going to be like the most like equally weighted or in their favor or whatever, which totally makes sense. But it also was really fascinating to me the amount of people on the jury who were like confused about just like confused about the whole thing, right? Like what counted as like evidence, like what they could take into
Yeah.
consideration, like what was allowed, you know, to be considered and stuff. And at one point, someone was really struggling, someone who was kind of in the middle was struggling and just kind of asked, like, for those of you who are solid, like, can you just tell me like why you're solid? And I had been saying from the beginning, like, I believe them. Like, if you believe them, then you have to vote guilty, right? Like, that's just the thing. Like, it's basically like,
You think there's not a reasonable doubt as to their testimony. Yeah.
totally. Well, and that was like a whole nother thing. We had a whole discussion about reasonable doubt and what that means, because people were like, that means you have to be like 100% certain that this happened, like no question. And I'm like, nope, that's not, I don't think what that
Yeah.
means. But like to my benefit or detriment, I don't know, but like, you know, in sharing with him, I was like, listen, also just statistically speaking, like, you know, like 1 in 5 girls is sexually abused when she is little. And like at that
Mhm.
time, I said 70%, but since then I've gone back and looked and it says like 70 to 90% of those perpetrators are people that the victims like love, know, trust, like usually some sort of like family-ish kind of member.
Mhm.
And so, like, even just statistically speaking, for me, I was like, I believe them. Like, there's no reason they would make this up. Like, a big
Mhm.
thing that they tried to say was the girls made it up because they want attention. And I just was like, even as a 9-year-old, you don't want that kind of attention. You know,
Yeah.
like, nobody is like, this is how I'm going to get attention,
Yeah.
like, for this.
But it was
So,
interesting because you said that the woman who came in very strongly believing that kids lie, then was
yeah,
really angry that you brought up
she
statistics that
really
hadn't been.
upset with me. Yeah, that's why I was sharing this, because we actually had
Yeah.
a conversation because she got really upset with me for sharing that and was like, you can't say that in here, you can't bring that in here, you can't use that to like base your decision on. And we got into this like whole discussion then, and I was like, granted, like we need to look at the facts in the
Yeah.
case. I am looking at the facts in the case. I'm telling you, this is ultimately like why I believe what I believe, or
Because
why
you believe the testimony.
what I decided. But also, I'm just saying, like, for, you know, like for me, like, even just statistically speaking, I know that this like probably happened, like beyond the shadow of a doubt, you know, like I don't check my brain at the door, like, because I came into the jury room. Like, that can't be
It's
my
so
only basis
interesting.
for
I
a
mean,
decision.
because you didn't have that evidence presented to you in the trial, right? So it's
Right.
not what you
Totally.
base your decision on, but she also did not have evidence presented in the trial that
That kids
kids
lie.
lie at any statistical level, right? And
Yeah.
so it's because we do bring all of our life experience, all of our preconceived ideas into the trial. I was looking at, so to bring it back to the Harvey Weinstein trial, one of his attorneys, which like often men accused of sexual assault within their legal team, there is a woman who's very strategically placed near him, like to make him seem safe. And so the attorney, female attorney on his team made statements to the news about how she had never been sexually assaulted because she would never put herself in that position, which is such an interesting preconceived idea that anyone who is sexually assaulted put themselves in that position. And I think there are all these preconceived ideas. And we talked about the CSI effect even
Oh yeah.
in trials, where often, and you saw this, I think, in your trial, of where often people, if they don't see a CSI law and order level of forensic investigation with like DNA tests and then music that tells you that this is the right evidence or whatever, then they think you have to have a not guilty verdict, that you have to acquit. But really, testimony is enough if you believe the testimony, right? And a lot of jurors don't understand that. But it's interesting to have on the Harvey Weinstein case in the news, even this like, suggestion that anyone who has this happen, it was really the victim's fault with these kids. If, like kids just lie, like just these victim blaming.
Well, and this one, my experience was really interesting because obviously people were not blaming the kids like they're kids, right? Like they can't control sometimes the situations that they're in. But I actually was also really struggling because they did a lot of like they transferred the victim blaming and shaming to the mom, of
Right.
like she's such a bad mom, like
But even saying kids lie is redirecting the trial towards whether the kids are liars instead of whether the defendant.
totally. Well,
Yeah.
and that was like a big thing for me because you had like
Mm.
the police interview with him talking about what great kids they are, and like the guy who was interviewing him then, like the police officer was like, so, they don't have extreme behaviors, like they don't like lie about stuff. And he was like, no, like he basically was like, they're great kids, they don't lie, And so I was like, okay, well, like that's kind of tricky that's like what the story is now,
Right. It's
So,
so
and
interesting.
even still, like, there's no gain for them. Like, the gain for them is that they don't have to go to his house anymore. You know what I mean? Like, there's no gain for them
Yeah.
in like making that up.
Right. 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 That's the other interesting thing. I mean, and in the Harvey Weinstein trial, you have all these women coming forward whose assaults are like more than 20 years old, that like they can't bring any case to testify, like 100 people or
Did you
whatever.
look at the list? I scrolled through the list the other day and I was like, oh my gosh, like this is nuts. Like it is crazy to me that there are so many of them and so many like well-known, like respectable, like women in Hollywood who've like added their name to like give it weight, and yet and still like it was such an ordeal.
And they could only convict on two. I mean,
Mm,
I think that that shows how much juries are misled to believe that you have to have a CSI level of proof in order to convict somebody of a crime.
yeah.
Which, on the other hand, then we were also talking about like people get sentenced to long prison terms as a result of these cases, right? And the juries have no control over that. The public has no control over that. It's legislatively set a lot of times, or the judge decides it. And like that can feel really shocking later because prisons not has not proven to be a great solution to any
Yeah.
of these violent crimes.
Yeah, I think like I've obviously been thinking about this a ton these last couple of weeks. I feel like the thing for me with both my trial and Harvey Weinstein, I had this moment like kind of like in the middle of our trial. And then when I thought we were only going to convict on one, where I was like, this is why people do not come forward with this kind of stuff, because this is ridiculous. Like this is exactly why, like, they don't want to like share their stories, and we're not like,
Yeah.
like we're not having success in this area because like it's such a ridiculous process. um then Weinstein got convicted, and there was all these like cheers of like, oh my gosh, this is such a breakthrough, like this is huge for the like, like Time's Up, Me
Yeah.
Too. And I think that's true. Like, so I think the way that I've been thinking about it is like, hopefully, like if people see that we're making progress in the regard of like you're gonna be held accountable, that will like, I don't think it will deter people from what they're going to do if they're going to do it, but hopefully like it sets the precedence, instead of like you're never going to win this kind of case, so why even try, to like if you feel like that's your path, like then go for it. Like that's, I hope, the shift that we're making. But it is also really difficult because, like I was solid almost from day one. Like the first day, all we did all day from like 10 to 5:30 was hear kiddo testimonies. So for me, that I was solid from that day forward. And it was like a 5-day trial on where I stood and how I
Yeah.
felt. Now, and that's like some pretty strong conviction, because some people were not. That being said, and I felt good with like where we ended up. Like I felt okay. Like I felt okay about being like, okay, I can renege on the one charge if we can get the other three. Like I felt pretty good about that. We
Yeah.
went into the courtroom and they read the like not guilty one first, and there were like gasps and like choked sobs, like kind of shrieky noises like behind us, which I couldn't see. Like the victim's family and their side of the courtroom was behind us. So that happened, and they were like gleeful, like on the other side of the courtroom, and then they read the other three charges, and like his daughter like broke down, and like the way that the courthouse is set up, like we went in, met with the judge, he thanked us for our service, we got dismissed, and we came right out into the defendant, his lawyer, his
Yeah.
family. And so for me, that was like an, oh my gosh, like we absolutely like did what we were asked to do. We made the right decision. Like in my mind, we made the right decision, but like this doesn't feel great, like it doesn't feel
Well, and then
awesome.
it's even for those girls who had that happen, it does nothing. Like it puts somebody who could reoffend
Yeah,
somewhere else, but that's just the start of their recovery.
totally. Totally. Yeah. And like that was the thing, I mean, it was alluded to or mentioned that they had gotten into counseling, which is great. I hope that's the case, but
Yeah.
like it's not like, like we as a jury had no control over any of those like other kinds of like circumstances. And then after we were done, we were allowed to like kind of look into things. And so they actually had an article in the paper the day that the trial started, and it said that if he was convicted, it was a Measure 11 crime. And so minimum sentencing is 6 years and 3 months or something like that. And I was like, oh my gosh, and then like we had talked and you were like, well, maybe they won't, like charge each one, like maybe it'll be charged as a slate. So anyways, he got like, from what I understand, he got like 18 plus
18 years. Yeah.
years, which again, like I'm so torn, because part of me is like, great, like he can't reoffend, but then the other part of me is like, his daughter who is falling apart is like, like early to like late 20s, I would guess, like she's probably getting ready to start a family. Like he's gonna miss like all of that for
Yeah.
for this, like I don't know, it's been hard. It's been like, I feel like it's been heavy. It's been a lot. Like I wasn't prepared to be on a jury at all, but I wasn't prepared for like kind of just the like weightiness of
Yeah.
it, because I think for me, like I want the best possible solution for like everyone involved, and this doesn't feel like that to me. So I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, and it's tough because as a juror, you have the one job,
Yep.
right? And you're
Mhm.
not allowed to think about the
Anything
potential
else?
sentencing. And then we're talking about this now, but while you're on a jury, you're not allowed to watch the news. We didn't talk
Mm-mm.
almost at all.
Yeah.
You were just removed from the business, and everything was just focused on what you were hearing in the jury room. And then now we've talked a lot about it and you've been kind of processing it. How's that been? Do you feel like?
I mean, I feel like the whole thing was not, I don't know if I had expectations, but it was not what I would have expected. I think on Thursday night when we just heard kiddo testimony all day and I couldn't talk about it, I was like, and I'm such a like verbal processor, I like legit like had to collect myself in the parking garage for like a half an hour because I still have to come home and be mom, you know? So
You
like
a 9 year a girl who's the same age. I
basically,
think.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, I like had to collect myself, come home, like be mom for a minute, you know, and then I like took a bath, had a giant glass of wine and went to bed because I was like, I don't even know how to like process this right now. And then like, yeah, like not being able to like, I don't know, it's kind of like it was interesting because like not being able to talk about it was hard for me, but also like I did genuinely like even the ones I disagreed with, I did genuinely like really enjoy our jury panel and the people that I met and like the discussions that were happening. Like that was good. And like it was fascinating, I think, to like really like remove a lot of the external. Like I at one point was like, everybody should have to do this where like they don't get to rely on anything else. They just have to sit and like, you know, like really
Yeah.
just like respond to what is being
And
presented to
just be
them.
in your own integrity and
Mhm,
your
because
own
they don't get to do
decision.
that
Yeah.
anymore, and even but, like, there was something really great about that too, because I was like, "Well, the best that I can do is, like, make my choice," you know,
Yeah.
like, based on what is being presented to me and the facts and the evidence and, like, all that kind of thing. Um, but actually, it's been like the process was hard, just like based on the subject matter, based on the discussions we were having, based on the long days. It was
Mhm.
long days and it was annoying. Like we had to go in and out of like the metal detector like multiple times a day. And like,
Which, if you live in Lane County, vote for the new courthouse.
please, oh my gosh, we can do a little plug for them right now because
Yeah.
they waste
Please.
so much time like shuffling people around that building. And like, it is so bad. Like,
It's just a terrible
yeah,
pit of
yeah.
disease.
It's real bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely would agree, concur with that.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so since then has actually been I feel like I'm doing a better job now of like kind of like dissociating and like distancing myself from it a little bit, like out of necessity, because I can kind of just sort of like go over and over and over something and I don't have any control over it. So there's not like a lot of point in like me doing that. But like immediately afterwards, I started looking up like all the things, you know, and like my brain, like I didn't sleep well for like 2 weeks because in the midst of the trial, like I just couldn't get like faces and stories and you know like what was happening and like how we were going to decide and like I couldn't get my brain to shut off that part and
Yeah.
now that it's over like looking into like all the different things you know and then feeling like having thoughts about the outcome and stuff like that like I don't know it's been
Yeah.
difficult it's been a difficult process and I wouldn't do anything differently like I would do
Yeah.
it the same but it's been interesting.
I think that a lot of times, and I don't know if this is resonates with you, but I think a lot of times in those experiences when we're feeling really distressed about part of the experience, a lot of times it's the part that we can't control.
Mhm.
And we kind of want to be in control of the part that's out of our control.
Mhm.
We want there to be a better resolution, a better like way to address things in that external part, that like the sentencing part,
Mhm.
right? And I think a lot of times if we can say, I did what was in my integrity in that decision, in what was in my control, I stand by that.
Mhm.
And the things that are outside of my control are somehow part, like, this is how I look at it, at least, is like God or the universe or whatever you believe, or like nature or the Big Bang or whatever you believe, has its own momentum and
Mhm.
has its own design. And that is totally outside of our control. And this guy's fate
Mhm.
or whatever it is outside of all of our control. Like maybe if we could have a time machine and go back when he's a baby and nurture him and say, do everything right, and then control that. And then we control all the people around him to never abuse him. And then you raise this perfect child and then he doesn't go to prison or whatever, right?
Totally. And
But this instead is part of his path, I think, you
yeah,
know?
well, and that's the thing too, is like,
Mm.
I don't even know that I disagree with the fact that he's gonna be in prison for so long. I just feel bad about it. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know if that makes sense, but
Yeah,
like,
but then it's like, I think that that's really interesting because I think like us feeling bad doesn't change anything in his fate, right? It just takes his punishment and then also punishes us.
I'm so good at that
Yeah,
piece. Yeah.
aren't we all, right?
So that's what I'm saying. Like, it's good because I think I'm getting to a point where I can like dissociate and distance a little bit and only own my thing. And
Yeah,
like, like ultimately, I am so glad. Like, I shocking, I know, but I was very vocal in that experience and I was there for a reason, like I
yeah,
think it was on purpose. And
yeah,
so like yeah.
yeah, and then, I mean, I think it's like sometimes we wanna be sad about the whole thing, about his side of it, about the girl's side of it. Like, I don't ever really take the stance of like, "Yay, somebody went to prison," you know? Like, I don't wanna be happy about that,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know? So,
Yeah.
I just
Yeah.
wanna
And
be sad, yeah.
yeah, like hopefully ultimately like the girls can get closure and healthy and like however that plays out
Yeah,
for him plays out for him. And yeah.
yeah, 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 it's such a big experience.
Totally. But did we ever circle back around and connect the dots of how maybe like Weinstein ended up in the position that he's in because there were jury deliberations that happened about like charges and like that had never occurred to me before that like juries reach decisions by like
Negotiation.
brokering deals. Yeah, like by like, like we have to get to a majority. This is like how we're going to
One, Oregon has a different system than some systems. I'm not
Okay.
sure that New York has the same, I'm
Yeah.
sure that they don't have the same 10 to 2 thing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, and I don't think even I don't know if even all of ours do all of ours have that majority?
No,
Yeah,
no.
I didn't think so because there was a couple people who had been on other juries and
Yeah,
didn't
yeah,
have that. So,
yeah, yeah. So it was probably different for his, but I think it always is like that. I think it always is you go in believing what you believe and then negotiate with other people who don't believe
mhm,
that,
yeah.
who have a different, which is hard.
So hard. I feel like this is unless you have more to like add to this
Mm,
discussion, but I feel like this is such a great like segue into our like ending. Like we usually try to
yeah,
do something not so heavy, a little lighter, a little more fun.
yeah,
But this is like a perfect segue into that because we have been watching The Bachelor and I watched Women Tell All yesterday
me too.
and I was thinking about this because I was like, I mean, I was already like, well, I'm happily married, so there's that. But like I was already thinking like there's no way like I could do this show. Like I could not handle it. But after my jury experience, I'm like 1,000% convinced that like I could not do that experience because even just the 12 of us in that room, like in the differing opinions and the conversations we had to have and like dealing with like personalities and like that different kind of stuff. I was thinking about these women in the house where like producers intentionally like set situations like up
Yeah,
for them, but also just the vast array of like beliefs and opinions and personalities and like things that are discussed and you're all dating the same guy and like like I just was like that is like a powder keg, like I couldn't, like there's no way. And I was like jury wasn't totally like that, but it was only 5 days, like
yeah,
this is like however long they're there for. So
yeah. Yeah. But then we were talking about at the end of the Women Tell All this week, well, you say it because of my voice.
Is it going away?
It's
Yeah. So at the end, well, and Women Tell All is always like really fascinating and interesting, but this one exceptionally so because I feel like people really like did not get along as well on this season. Like usually there's one or two, but like it seems like this season, like most of the women were like struggling in one way or another with somebody. And so at some point in the evening, they all kind of just like devolved like into this like crazy situation. But at the end of it, they had Rachel Lindsay, who's the former Bachelorette, come out and kind of call attention to like cyberbullying, if you will, or like, like the way that people will say things online behind their computer
yeah,
screens that they would not probably in normal everyday life. And like they've drawn attention to this before in the past, but last night they really highlighted like it has crossed a line from like
yeah.
criticizing things they have done on the show to like who they are as people in a lot of ways that are like super biased around things.
Just a lot of comments of you're a worthless person. You should die. Like
Yeah, and like racist, like
extreme
a lot of like
threat.
racist, super hateful like
Yeah.
comments. And like we had kind of talked about this earlier in the season because there was like a conspiracy theory that he ends up with one of the producers of
Right.
the show. And when that got leaked, people lost their damn minds. Like they
Right.
went crazy. Like I went to this producer's account and people were like, you ruined this season for me. Go kill yourself. Like you're, like so
Yeah.
worthless, like blah, blah, blah. Like it is this thing that has happened between like, enjoying the like fun and the drama of it, or like being like, oh, that's funny, like entertainment, to like people being
Right.
so emotive about it that they can't like
And
differentiate.
like even kind of I feel like those things are threatening. That's like scary
Totally, totally. Well, and a lot of the texts and comments and stuff that they read last night were about race, which is so unfortunate and like
about people's hair because of
not
their
about behavior.
race and
Yeah, it wasn't
yeah.
of like, like, oh, you did this thing, you look silly. It was like you're a legitimately like
It was
terrible.
like because of your race, nobody cares what you say. Nobody
Mhm.
wants to hear from you. You should go. And a lot of it was you should go die.
Yeah, and
And
like 100% of the girls raised their hand and said they've got some version of that
a
kind of
version of
method and
it.
that they have to like put all these filters. Like the interesting thing I think about it is that a lot of them go on the show and there's like sort of this understanding that like they're then gonna like have some sort of like social media platform. I don't know if that's even in their contract, but that typically is what happens. They have some sort of social media platform. So the show kind of creates this perfect storm of like you've done these really stupid things on TV to a group of fans that are like really passionate about the thing. But then
Yeah.
also there's the cyberbullying situation where they say whatever they want behind the computer screen and they have no sense of like, this is a real person. They're actually going to have like a real response to this thing that I'm doing, which is
Well, and
totally
even,
ridiculous.
I mean, I think that when things cross a line like that, like there's some situations where like threat assessment experts will be like, no, you're actually being stalked or you're actually being threatened. Like it's not just behind a computer. Not that that kind of speech is acceptable behind a computer screen, but like it makes you wonder
Yeah. Well,
if
and that's the
you're
other thing
in
too. Like
danger.
they're obligated to show up at all these things. Like they're
Yeah.
getting all these messages online. They're obligated to show up at all these things. Like they were talking about, like, I mean, all of them got emotional about it, but they were talking about like how they actually have to set filters like on all of
Yeah.
their accounts and everything to filter out certain words so they don't even see it because just the onslaught of like so many messages on a daily basis.
Well, and then the interesting thing I think is like when we were talking about it, you were kind of saying like we have this like very volatile, very like messy group of
Yeah.
bachelorettes,
Yeah.
right? And then we talk about what is appropriate and not appropriate to post to them and but then I think that that is like the interesting thing is like it really doesn't matter how much champagne somebody shoots up their nose. There's like not a scenario where it's acceptable to say then you should go die, you know?
Totally.
Like I don't
Nothing.
care how mean. What's
Yeah.
the woman's name who was like kind of mean to everybody? Was it
Tammy.
Tammy? Yeah. Like,
Mhm.
I don't care how mean she was to Kelsey. There's not a scenario where you cite her race as a reason that she should kill herself. Like,
100%.
no scenario. Like that level of like just language, but actual threat
Mhm.
versus somebody shooting champagne up their nose is like so I mean, not that that's ever acceptable, but I think it goes back to it's such an interesting question of who do we want to be? How do we want to show up, right? Do we want to justify hate speech by somebody else's race, by somebody else's behavior and say, well, now it's okay for me to threaten people? I mean, it's such an outrageous.
Yeah, I do feel like it's really interesting. I feel like I have a lot of questions like about this because I feel like The Bachelor just keeps growing in like popularity. Like Chris always talks about like what a great like fan base they have and they haven't lost, like people like for a reality TV show, they've been going for a long time and they still have like a solid like group of people that like love that show. And like social media has just gotten like bigger and bigger, but it is really interesting how this has become something that's like really problematic recently. And I wonder like if people are just feeling so much more empowered to like have that kind of speech
So, right?
be like out front publicly, like, or to like even post it. I mean, I think you're right. I think like it's happening in real life too, but to like have those kinds of things, like there's not a line
Yeah.
between like, she was kind of a jerk, so now I'm
So
gonna
now
like,
I'm gonna threaten her life. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. It's so gross.
yeah.
Like, is that who people want to be? Is somebody who threatens violence and yeah.
Totally. And I think like you had a great point of like most of these girls are like in their early 20s. You know what I mean? Like, do you really want to be that person who's like telling this, like, even if you think she's silly or like there's a lot of drama or whatever, like, do you really want to be that person who's like so caught up in it that like you're telling someone that age to like, that they're worthless and that they should go die or like whatever, like a lot of it was like really gross. Like there've been like
Yeah.
gross like sexual stuff too. And
Yeah.
so I don't know, like, and like, why are you trolling like like I don't know,
Is
like
that who you want to be? It's
all very
so
bizarre.
I
Yeah.
mean, I honestly, on the other hand, I love getting haters. I
I was
think
just
they
gonna
should
say, will
all
you
hire
speak to the
me.
trolls because you love trolls?
I
Like,
do love trolls. I feel like they should all hire me and I can manage their social media and respond. I
yeah.
think I'm really good at making trolls and haters really uncomfortable or making friends with them. But I would love to respond to any of those messages. I would be happy to step in and we can just put it out in the universe. Just be
So,
like,
like, what would you say? Give us a for instance, like to one of those messages. Like, what would you say to that person?
I mean, I sometimes with ones that are that extreme, I just
Uh,
don't respond. I mean, like what I usually respond to is something that's more like sometimes I'll even be like, I know that was really dumb, right? I totally
like,
agree.
if they're criticizing you on something,
Yeah, like I
well,
totally
they'll shut that
agree.
down because
I
then there's no.
didn't.
I use that tactic with Lorelai.
I know. We
Like,
both agree about that. That was ridiculous. I'm glad we're on
yeah.
the same side. Other times people will bring up like I've had a hate. I mean, I don't get enough haters. It's kind of unfair, but I have gotten them. I had one that was on a newspaper article that I was in, and it was talking about, men being falsely accused and that no one represents men in their sexual harassment issues. And I was like, I am happy to like get on a call with you to talk about your issue, because we do that here. And men are like a large percentage of the people that we support in our business, and we love men. We just don't love sexual harassment
Totally.
of anybody. Um, and then I with the "you should go die," I'm just like, "Really?"
Yeah.
Like, but I mean, that level though, I like, honestly, at that level, I would probably send it to the police
Yeah.
or to the FBI. Like, I think that that is worth reporting. That is not protected speech. It counts as a threat, and I feel like that's the level where you then just forward it to law enforcement and create a record of what
Yeah.
you're experiencing. I don't really engage with that kind of thing, but I don't get that kind of thing yet.
Yeah.
Someday.
Someday. Goals. Hashtag goals. I
I
love your
know.
goals.
Great.
That's very fun. I do love though, Alexa, I think it is, has the really cool like fro-y
Oh,
hair.
yeah.
And she was talking about how like she got a lot of like hater comments about her hair,
Yeah.
but just as many like lovely, affirming, like
Right.
you so much, like representation matters, and so
Yeah.
she was like, like that is really great to like.
I mean, and then for her, right, she got the comments that like her hair was something bad about her hair, right? And then I think that's the signal that you're in the exact right place
Mhm.
of like representing people like you. So I might even in those situations respond with something like, "Thank you for showing me I'm in the right place. I'm going to keep showing up. You just keep telling me what you hate. Keep watching, keep telling me what you hate.
Totally.
Thanks for motivating me to show up more as myself. I'm going to do better next time to even lean into what you're talking about. You're giving me
Totally.
all the signals of where I need to focus."
Totally. I think Sydney, I want to say it's Sydney also
Yeah.
talked about that of like, I mean, I did think it was a little bit funny, but she was like, I want like little girls to know that they can grow up and do, or little girls who look like me to grow up and know that they can do this too. And like, while that is like amusing on the one hand, it also is like good for you.
I
Like
think it's real though, because we barred women of color from The Bachelor
for
for
the longest
decades,
time. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so for them to be allowed to have that social media platform, that TV platform is a big deal, I think. Like we
That's
can trivialize it, but they have a big influence, I think.
yep.
And
Yep.
like whether it's about hair and natural hair, which is important, like that touches other issues, right? Or whether it's about like what relationships are supposed to look like, uh monogamy, it's not monogamy, like what's Madison's
Oh, abstinence.
fidelity, abstinence, yeah, those things, like who's allowed to show up on these shows.
Mhm. Yeah.
I mean, doesn't
This season
necessarily
was
mean
great for
yeah,
that. It was probably the most, I would say this season was probably the
so
most
far.
diverse, and like there were a lot of different like belief, like behavior.
Uh-huh. And
Um
then I think we can expand to like more body positivity potentially in the future.
100%. I would love to see that. That would
But
be
the natural hair thing is part of that, right?
mm,
Like that's an edge into body positivity, right? Like you don't have to look like
yep.
Pamela Anderson to be on The
Yeah.
Bachelor anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, which this reminds me at some point we're gonna have to talk about the whole like pageantry, like
Oh
childhood
my gosh.
pageantry to like bachelor
I know,
contestant
I've even forgotten
trajectory.
about that.
Well, we're gonna put a pin in that one. We're gonna have to talk about that one later, but that was a good
Okay.
reminder of that.
Yeah, we have so much left to talk about. We're getting
Yeah.
caught up, though, I
Yes.
feel like. All
Yes.
right. So for anyone who is watching or watched, send us questions about anything you want us to talk about how to handle issues in the news, how to stay involved and engaged without killing yourself, having to die, right?
Yeah,
Like these poor
for real.
Bachelor
And
girls.
be
Yeah.
kind. Like, just
Yeah.
be kind. I
Yeah.
feel like we need to go back to like Lorelai learns at school, like be kind, be respectful, like do your work, whatever, like,
Keep your hands to yourself. Yeah.
yeah, like I
Yeah.
feel like we're back in that place where like people need a little reminder.
We all need to know that, right? We can always be a little more kind, a little more respectful. And there's no advantage to us of being mean or disrespectful.
Totally. And like I think a big motivation for us in doing this is to show that you can like talk about hard things. Like you don't have to like go and hide. And I think for me, it's always so valuable for me to like process things with you, because I think you have really great insight and advice on things that are particularly hard. And so I want to keep like doing that with
Yeah.
you.
It's
So
super fun.
yeah,
Thank you
I
for
love it.
doing it.
All
Next
right.
week, hopefully my voice will be back.
I know. Good job making it the whole time.
Thank you. I've pushed through. I might need to go take a nap though.
Yeah. All
All
right.
right. I'll talk to you later.
Bye.